Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. Last night, we observed the end of Yom Kippur, break the fast. And it was a wonderful event, celebrated by many friends and family. So I enjoyed myself, and one of our guests, Craig, who is a regular listener to this podcast, came up to me and said, "John, did you hear the latest on the Norovirus?" And of course, I hadn't been listening to the news because it was Yom Kippur. And he said to me, "John, do you realize that Donald Trump, early in his first few months as president, shut down the agency which did the inspections on the Norovirus?" I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yes. Have you heard about what's happening on the cruise ships with more and more norovirus outbreaks?" And Craig's suggestion, which was verified this morning as I checked all the news outlets, was correct. If you wonder what the impact of these cuts are, just take a look at the norovirus. So, Craig, many thanks for listening, and more important, thanks for letting me know about the story. But there's more. During the late presidential campaign, Donald Trump insisted he had never looked at or understood Project 2025. Now, on the third day of the government shutdown, he is embracing Project 2025. And his intention, his stated intention, is to have cutbacks, more cutbacks in the federal government. And you realize that during this period of government shutdown, the power of the president to discharge or furlough people in various departments of the federal government is clear. There is no obstacle to Donald Trump doing what he's doing. And as you know, I suggested several days ago that I believe Donald Trump secretly is delighted to have a federal government shutdown, because it expands his presidential power and allows him to conduct even more layoffs and to implement things which he said he wasn't going to implement. And I speak now particularly of Project 2025. What will happen in the next 3 days? Because the weekend is coming. And I suggest to you that as long as these differences exist, the odds of a government shutdown remain fixed. Now, my wife and I are planning to go on a trip to Texas, and we plan to visit presidential libraries. Those presidential libraries will be LBJ, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush. But here's the problem. Those libraries are now closed because of the government shutdown. Now, we have to go to Texas for a wedding, and I'm delighted about that. But it looks like my dream of visiting the presidential libraries, well, may not materialize. And what about the national parks? Take a look at national parks across this country, which now are basically shutting down. Now, you may say, so they closed down for a few days, but we are told that when you shut a national park, in order to reopen it, there's more work to be done. And who knows what the impact will be fully. Now, that does not affect the Presidio of San Francisco, at least not fully, because we are a private operation in part with the Presidio Trust. But do you understand that the implications of a government shutdown are real? Now, I made a suggestion. Outrageous, I was told by some of you. Outrageous that if the government shuts down, the members of Congress should not be given a salary. That's right. That might be an incentive for them to be more careful when it comes to government shutdowns. This is a matter of grave concern. And I want, if I can, to return for a moment to another question. And that has to do with the president's major announcement last week about a deal to end the hostage crisis in Israel and the Middle East. The answer now is that it all depends on Hamas. And you will recall that I suggested that given the terms of the agreement, I thought it highly unlikely that Hamas would, in fact, respond affirmatively. Well, that appears to be the case. They now want changes, and you know what that means. It's a stalling tactic. Hamas refuses to acknowledge the right of Israel to exist as a nation. And I say that to you because I want you to understand that is the nub of the problem. The nub of the problem is that Hamas and too many in the Palestinian national movement seek Israel's destruction. And Israel will not self-destruct. And in fact, during these high holidays and the approaching second anniversary of the murder, massacre, pogrom, which took place in Israel, there is a feeling that they want all the hostages back. But Hamas will have to agree to the terms. And you and I know that's going to be virtually impossible for Hamas. So we wait to see the outcome of that situation. And one last point. I spoke in our last podcast about Ukraine, and I spoke particularly about what Russia is doing in Ukraine. And I want to point out that Russia has not stopped its missile attacks, its drones, and its continued military action in Ukraine. The thought that there will be some ability to make a settlement seems more and more unlikely. I want you all to think carefully about the fact that Europe teeters and totters. There is no way to appease Putin, it would seem, short of conceding to him what he wants. And the Ukrainians are more than ever determined to survive. This is an interesting podcast for me to deliver because there are so many implications domestically and in terms of foreign policy. But one thing is clear, and that is the power of the President of the United States of America. And that, to me, makes it even more important to consider what those powers are and what the Supreme Court will rule as it reconvenes this coming week. It will be a fascinating period in American political history, and all of us wait with anxious anticipation, hoping the court will have the courage to stand up and be counted. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am John Rothman. Make sure to follow along and let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which, of course, is our goal. I will welcome your comments on LinkedIn, Facebook, and, of course, my regular direct email. And when you do make that effort, I appreciate it more than I can say. And to Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of this podcast, thanks, Gogo, for everything you do to make sure we're up and running. I am John Rothman. I'll be back on Monday, right here on Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you then.